Eve, what's going on? Happy Friday, everybody. We got people come on in the room. Come on in the room. Happy Friday. Happy Friday. Happy Friday. Eric Range, how you doing there, brother?
What's going on, my sister? It is Friday. I get to spend a few moments with you, talking with some awesome people in the cannabis industry, man. I can't complain. You know, it's Fire Fridays, as we're going to start calling it.
It is.
Talk with Roz, man.
Every time we have Can I Talk with Roz, I don't care. We'll say an hour, and the show turns out to be so fire. So everybody that's coming on in, make sure you're sharing. You got the comments are open, wide open. The comments are going to be open. We have two dynamic individuals here with us today. We're talking about access to capital in the cannabis industry. We are going to be intentional and have just a robust conversation. So please make sure that you're sharing this with everyone. Send it out there, copy, paste it, post it, whatever you need to do. And let's get going. So E, just talk about the issue with how big is the problem of access to capital, and specifically for Black and brown companies in the cannabis industry.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I talk about this a lot. Obviously, as a business owner in the space myself, I have my own issues that I'm working through. But, you know, access to capital really and truly for this industry is across the board. You know, you can remove race from it. And a lot of folks have a difficult time raising capital for this industry. You know, we still are a very high risk industry. So for, you know, investors who are not already a part of the industry or maybe a patient or have some understanding of what's going on in the space, they may be a little bit risk adverse. You know, in fact, I just spoke with an investor earlier this week where they've been kind of paying attention, but they're still a little bit like, let me hold off a little bit.
Let me hold off a little bit,
but we're not sure if it's the time. Yeah. So, you know, it's one of those things that is tough. And I think minorities in particular, we face challenges because, you know, many times before you can get to actual like venture capital where you can get to the big money, you got to start with like seed funding. Like, how do you get an idea from an idea to an actual business? You gain some traction, demonstrate proof of concept. You know, that usually comes before you put yourself out there and you're raising actual funding to scale the business. And so for minorities, that's tough because we don't, you know, I don't have aunts and uncles I can go to and say, hey, give me, you know, 15, 20K to let me play around with this idea, you know, and see how it works out.
Absolutely.
And that becomes a huge, huge barrier for getting going. And so, you know, for a lot of minority businesses, you know, we have to bootstrap it. You know, we have to figure out how do we set money aside from whether it be our daily pay, you know, or a weekly paycheck or, you know, take from our 401k or in savings. And we really have to get creative in how we get to a point where, like I said, we've proven the proof of concept for our business. And now we can take it to an investor and we're ready to begin to scale. So there's a lot that has to happen before then. And it's just, you know, it's not an easy journey. It's not for the faint of heart, for sure.
Yep. Well, listen, guys, you enough of hearing from us. We got two guests that are hot fire. They're going to talk about this. They're subject matter experts in access to capital, what it means, past, present, and future. So our first guest I want to bring up to our stage is Mr. David Abernathy. Hey, David, how are you?
Hello. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm great. David, I'm so happy to have you. And our next guest we're going to bring up is Mr. Eddie Armstrong. Eddie, here we go. How you doing, Eddie? How are you?
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. How you doing, Roz?
Oh, we're good. We're so happy to have both of you guys here today. So let's just start with first, David. Please introduce yourself to everyone who does not know who you are and the organization that you work with. Please introduce yourself.
Great. Yeah, happy to be here. I'm David Abernathy. I'm a principal with Arcview Management Consulting, and I also sit on the board of directors for the Arcview Group, as well as Minority Cannabis Business Association and the Marijuana Policy Project, as well as several nonprofits outside of the cannabis space. I also operate some businesses outside of cannabis, but really I've been in the cannabis industry for about 12 years now, and with Arcview for going on 8. And really excited with a lot of the developments that we've made at Arcview over the last couple of years, and excited to be able to share them with you.
Absolutely. Hold that thought, because we're going to come back to you, because we're going to talk about Arcview. Everybody knows that name, knows what, or if they don't know, they have an idea what it stands for and the work they've done in this space, but we're going to talk more in detail. Eddie, please introduce yourself. Tell everyone who you are, your organization, and where you're located, and then we're going to go deep and learn more about yourself.
Good deal. I'm down here in the way deep parts of the South. I'm an Arkansas boy. I'm here in Little Rock, Arkansas. But for everybody out there, I'm Eddie Armstrong, a former member of the Arkansas House of Representatives and former House Minority Leader, first African-American to serve as House Minority Leader in the South since Reconstruction in our state. I am the CEO and chairman of the Cannabis Capital Group, which is a company I founded with my wife, Shara Armstrong, and my partner, John Engel, and a handful of senior experts back in 2016, with three primary focuses, one being on assisting communities and groups that were interested in applying for cannabis cultivation licenses across multi-states or in new developing states. We offer education and advisory services and joint partnerships with several physicians that we've been able to partner and do a lot of focus groups with. And then last but not least, I think the thing that I am most excited about in the Cannabis Capital Group is our efforts to democratize the green rush through our equity crowdfunding platform. And this crowdfunding platform, when you think of WeFunder or Kickstarter, oftentimes crowdfunding platforms take a real approach at just raising through the crowd. What separates us from other crowdfunding platforms is that we are one of the premier broker-dealer-led equity crowdfunding platforms coming to the market. And that has all been guided by our partnership with Arcview Capital, which I'm very excited today. This is history-making moment for a minority-owned company of my stature to be partnering with such a conglomerate like Arcview Capital and Arcview Group. After serving in politics, I witnessed what John Boehner had done. I'm a business guy. My family is in the medical business space. Like David, I have a couple of other businesses, but this has been my primary focus and will be over the next 5 years, specifically because of the backstory in my community and in my space. Growing up, there were just a lot of troubling times. As you might imagine, I grew up in the 90s down in Little Rock, Arkansas, witnessed a lot of terrible things. And
Right.
A lot of that was due to drugs and police and, fear. But in the end, I survived all of that, and I'm very happy to be here today. The Cannabis Capital Group is a thriving company, very excited about the strides we've made. We're currently now in Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois, Georgia, and soon to be Louisiana as they emerge into the medical market or the rec market in 2022.
Sure. So, man, we got so much to you told not only about yourself, then you pop some news on everybody that people don't know, and then you also got people just excited.
Listen, I got questions already lined up, and I'm
lined up. So Eddie, we so excited. So listen, David, if you can talk about, just give us a little bit of overview. Arcview, you guys are celebrating 10 years, and just talk about the breadth and depth of the organization, the purpose of it, what you've been able to, you've done from a funding aspect, and talk a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Arcview Group was founded in 2010 by Troy Dayton and Steve D'Angelo, and it was really founded with the idea that business could be one of the most powerful platforms for social change. And we really need social change when it comes to cannabis policy, especially in 2010, but even today, cannabis is illegal in far too many places. Black and brown people are being locked up disproportionately for it. And Arcview really started by leveraging capital to bring about that social change. The name Arcview actually comes from a Martin Luther King quote, which is that let's see if I can get it right, the road to justice, or the
The arc.
arc of the moral universe
Yes.
is long, but it bends towards justice.
Come on now.
Yeah, and it's been a really amazing journey. Arcview started out as an investor network, so really just pulling together investors who are interested in funding early stage cannabis companies and finding those companies and bringing those two groups together. But pretty early on, we realized that there were some other needs in the space. So in 2013, we launched Arcview Market Research and started publishing really the first industry reports that looked at the size of the industry, regulatory dynamics, trends, projecting growth, things like that. And we've been publishing reports ever since. And it continued to grow and grow over the years. And then a couple of years ago, we really started diversifying a lot more. So in the past couple of years, we've launched Arcview Ventures, which is a venture fund, soon to be several venture funds, deploying capital directly into the cannabis space. We launched Arcview Capital, which is a FINRA and SEC licensed broker dealer, helping companies raise money, helping with M&A activity, IPOs, and some of the equity crowdfunding stuff that I'm sure Eddie will talk a little bit more about. And we also launched Arcview Management Consulting, which I help lead here, and we help businesses of all sizes inside and around the cannabis industry wrap their heads around strategy issues, the implications of federal legalization and state policy change, how to grow in a sustainable fashion. So we cover adult use and medical cannabis, CBD and other hemp-derived cannabinoids, as well as industrial hemp. And we're doing quite a bit of work there as well. And I'm very excited to announce, I think for the first time publicly here on this podcast, that Arcview has teamed up with the Cannabis Capital Group to bring some of their services and expertise into the fold around licensing and compliance, as well as to work with them on the equity crowdfunding. As you mentioned, social equity programs have taken off around the country, and some have worked, some not so much, but one of the big glaring deficiencies across the board is access to capital. So it's one thing to grant licenses to people of color and people who are disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, but if they then don't have the funds to start their businesses, you haven't really done anything.
Yeah.
And because of our history, because of our experience with capital and cannabis companies, we realized that we were in a really strong position to be able to do something about that and affect positive change there. So we're really excited to do that. Along with our other initiatives, we've launched mentorship programs, helping people of color build their businesses, build their brands, and a whole host of other initiatives.
Hey, David, I'm curious. After 10 years, and like you said, the company name comes directly from an MLK quote. Somebody's even asking how do we think MLK felt about cannabis and so on. But I'm curious, just from your own standpoint, from a personal standpoint, with the focus of the company being to leverage capital to create impact and change. What is it, if you had to choose one thing that you're most proud of over the last 10 years that you guys have been able to do, what has been that one thing that you look back on and you say, you know what, that was such a good thing, even, if it wasn't something that was public, because and a lot of times the things we do, go unnoticed and so on. So yeah, thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think I would highlight two things. One is really just being able to have a noticeable impact on accelerating legalization around the country, and not just accelerating legalization, but really working to make sure that we can have a positive effect on policies. There are a lot of bad cannabis policies in legal states. We have pushed for years to exert whatever influence we can on making sure that the policies work, that they're fair, that they're equitable, and we'll continue to push. There's still a lot of work to be done there. And the other one is really, I think that the educational effect of our market research. We have published thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of reports about the cannabis industry. And we have always been very careful about making sure that we have the best, most accurate information, but also making sure that we're framing the discussions around cannabis in a way that is helpful. There's a lot of misinformation about cannabis. There are a lot of sort of people have incorrect ideas about what cannabis is, and so really having an opportunity to frame some of those conversations with sort of data-backed insights has been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, I think we had a question about the mentorship programs. I think sometimes when we hear Arcview, it's so much that you have. It's almost like if you look at the past, you saw a lot of, you were organizing and creating opportunities for businesses to have access to investors. And now you're seeing, as you're growing, there's so many other different nuances of services that you can offer. If you have someone that's listening right now, where do they start on your site? Where, I mean, because we had a young lady that's like, listen, I need funding. And so are there some just like tips 101 or some kind of like, kind of navigating through the website of all the services that you offer? Any recommendations?
Yeah, I think it really depends a lot on where you're coming from and what you're doing. So we've got programs like Arcview Ignites that help companies put together pitch decks, help provide resources for understanding those things. We're actually working with Oaksterdam University now on developing a course, which we'll be launching soon, that will help explain cannabis funding topics. So what is a seed round? What's a Series A? What's the difference between private equity and venture capital? What's a convertible note? Yeah, what's a cap table? So keep an eye out for that. I think that'll be fantastic. Our mentorship program, we launched a pilot last year, and that's still ongoing. We took applications from a bunch of potential mentees, and we selected some of them and matched them individually with mentors based on where they felt they needed the most help. So we found subject matter experts that were really in a great position to help them with the specific areas that they needed help with. And we really built a rigorous program around it. So we don't just put the mentor and mentee together and walk away. Sure. We have regular calls with them. We check in. We make sure everything's going well. We see if there are improvements that we can make to the organization and the structure of the program, additional resources we can provide. So we're looking forward to opening that up more in the future. And specifically, if you're a woman, there are some really great opportunities with the Cannabis Women's Inclusion Network, which started out as the Women's Investor Network to bring together female investors who were operating in the space and wanted a community where they could exchange ideas and help one another. And really, we expanded it to include not just investors, but also operators. It is open to men as well, but certainly the focus is on making sure that there's a community and resources available for women.
Yes.
So we'll be working with M4MM actually to provide some free memberships for the Women's Inclusion Network as well.
Yeah. I think there's so much. So this is what I'm gonna hold you. I'll hold myself accountable, and you and I work together. We're gonna get a little master list of all the different things that that Arcview offers, and then being able to put that down and kind of like give them a navigation sheet and make it available to our followers, our members, anyone else, anybody. I think that could help out because you named off so many different resources. The market research is so critical. Before I go into that, I want to pivot to Eddie right quick because Eddie, in your company's name, the Cannabis Capital Group, you can imagine the first thing people are wanting to understand is, well, what can you do? Are you going to fund this for me? How do you handle those questions when they come to you and they're like, well, I need funding, and it's kind of like there's no rhyme or reason. You don't know where they are in the type of funding. But how is you as a company and as an organization? How do you handle those questions? And what's the best advice to give to someone that might be listening right now that says, I need funding?
Well, the first piece of advice is I'll back up. It's been tough. Imagine coming from Arkansas, moving to the land of Lincoln, in the heart of Chicago, right dead smack in the middle of the state legislature, doing something that had never been done in the country to pass some of the most progressive cannabis legislation in the nation. And so you might imagine the nostalgia when we announced and Black Enterprise picked up our story and communities were saying, yo, where's the money? And we never came out with the advertising that we were the money pool, but we could identify and help guide you to access to capital. And fortunate for us, with relationships like the ones we have with Arcview Capital and Arcview Management Group, and more importantly, for some of our early homework, we went out a year in advance and met with at least 200 physicians from the East Coast to the West, and really recognized that there was a market of physicians or healthcare professionals that had discretionary capital, usually utilize their traditional brokers or investors to invest dollars, yet they really had an appetite and wanted to learn and invest in cannabis.
Yeah.
And that reason being is because most of these physicians never learn anything about cannabis in their curriculum, whether it be post-residency or in their early stages of their education. You learn something at the early outset stages we learned in our focus groups, and very little is taught about the true medicinal impacts or effects that cannabis may have for cancer patients, hypertension patients, fibromyalgia, glaucoma, anxiety for women. I mean, there's several things. So where do you find the money? I have just tried to be an air traffic controller in my capacity when speaking to communities about putting them in places and spaces where if I've got access to Arcview or with new funds that are coming into existence, like what Chris Weber is doing with JW Assets, or Al Harrington and what he's focused on, I have tried to just navigate being able to put people in places in contact with those groups that are able to either provide them funding. In addition to that, going out and identifying non-traditional banks, like Abaca here in Arkansas. Shout out to Abaca, my bank. We took this road and went to BMO Harris, Fifth Third Bank, several banks to try and bank us as a non-plant touching company. We offer consulting, advisory, and crowdfunding services. However, with the name Cannabis Capital Group,
of course,
we were turned away, and we actually opened our first bank account with a local bank, but that quickly closed. And Abaca was so grateful. But
imagine minorities for medical marijuana, and so.
Oh my goodness.
But I will say this, and not to interrupt you, and giving a shout out to banks. Regions Bank is our banking. They've banked us for 4 years now. We've never had an issue. And I will give you guys advice. The banking is not walking in and setting an account. The banking is forming a relationship with a banker who has enough pool and also has enough care and concern to know about what you do, and they're going to make sure that the underwriters, the people in the back, don't kick your account out. And that's why we've been here this long. We just had a banking lady I just met. I told her about us doing an expungement clinic. She was like, well, my son, he has a record, and she was a white lady who was just like, didn't know anything about this or expungement. And so the ability to help people, it transverses color, doesn't matter. People have an interest in this industry and they want to be involved. So Eddie, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but just your point was so perfect.
I saw somebody just pop up and said banking is tricky. The thing you must know is that it is tricky. Relationships are key. You will be audited because the bank's going to be audited. But at the end of the day, for anyone out there that's listening, there are banks in your states, in this country, that are banking cannabis businesses. So if you can't find them, this is a great resource to try and get some support there. But there are banks that exist. We had a relationship with the president of our bank here in our state, and it was that relationship that got us the account in the initial phase.
Yeah,
that is so key. Let me ask you both this question in terms of when it comes to investing, right? What is the current climate in the investment market? What are investors looking for? What types of investments are they making? What stages are the businesses in? What is their appetite in terms of how quickly they want return on investment? Can you shed some light on because I think there's also, a lot of times a disconnect between, people who are looking for funding and the people who have the funding. There's a disconnect between what is actually, the climate is.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm alley-oop to David. It's such the wild, wild west in so many ways still that it spans from one end of the spectrum to the other. Most people are running, I want to grow it or I want to sell it. But then you may have a textile company, or you may have an electrician that's trying to get his capital and maybe be able to install these hydroponic lights, or a nutrients company that's trying to provide the plant nutrients to these big growers and still can't find the access to capital. We have seen them come from a broad range of what they're looking for capital for. And once we've scaled that down, it's a lot of education on not only finding the resource for capital, but being able to set yourself up in a way to understand that it's a cash intensive process, and it's pretty long. It's not a fly by day. You get your returns in a year. That ain't happening. So
hey,
David,
listen to what he's telling you guys. This ain't no, I give you 10, you flip it, give me 20.
Yeah. I mean, that will happen in the equity crowdfunding space. I mean, that is what we recognize, is that everybody doesn't have 10 million, but they may have 10,000. And if there's an opportunity for them to invest in one or two unicorn companies that are going to scale, we want to provide that access to non-traditional investors who otherwise wouldn't have had access to these types of deal flow opportunities. And we are seeing in states like Illinois, Maryland, Florida, who's gobbling up these companies and are making a large return. David, I'm sorry, I wanted to just kind of put that piece of early homework.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's great context. And at the Arcview Group, we are fortunate that we sort of sit at this nexus of the folks who have capital and the folks who are raising capital. And we have hundreds of investors that are members of Arcview, and we've had thousands over the years, and they really span a huge range. So we have investors that are looking to place small amounts of capital, $50 or $100,000 total. We have investors that are looking to place tens of millions of dollars. What we find, especially with the early stage investors, the investors who are looking at seed stage investments, early stage companies, is a lot of them have preferences based on their background. So if an investor is a real estate investor who has a lot of experience with real estate, maybe they're looking at investments that involve some sort of real estate component. So a company that is acquiring a piece of property, and that's part of that's one of the assets that the company will have post investment. If the investor has a tech background and they're used to investing in technology, maybe they're looking at point of sale systems or compliance systems or fintech payment solutions. If the investor has a biomedicine background and they're used to investing in that field, maybe they're looking for things in that space. So it's really important to find investors who are interested in the kind of company that you're building.
Yeah.
And
there's still
also,
even at that stage, the tech investor or the agriculture investor or the real estate investor, I mean, this is a risk averse business in itself because of the federal parameters to it. But when we've come across these investors, I mean, with large pots of money, it's a long walk down, 4 6 months sometimes to get them really comfortable with seeing the true benefits to putting their dollars up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's not an easy a walk in the park where you just like, here's my money, go take it and figure it out. It's not. It's just foreign. It seems like to a lot of folks that would want to put their money into the market.
Yeah, and to that point, let me ask you this: is it a hesitation on, or like say that 4 to 6 month walk? Is it more so getting them comfortable with where the state of cannabis regulation is, or is it more so getting them to a place of understanding how companies are able to extract revenues from the industry, if that makes sense?
It depends on the investor. So a lot of the investors that we work with are very familiar with the cannabis industry. Some of them have been investing in the cannabis space for years. If it's a new investor, there's going to be a steep learning curve for just understanding the dynamics of the industry. But one of the really important parts is forming a relationship and building that trust, right? Ultimately, when an investor is investing in a company, they're investing in a team that's running that company. And they're entering into what is probably going to be a long-term relationship, right? So it's important for both people, for the investors and the people raising capital, to feel comfortable with each other. They're gonna have to make decisions together. They're gonna have to metaphorically live with each other for a long time. And there are situations where, as an entrepreneur, you have to make a tough decision because maybe you found an investor who's willing to invest in your company, but it just doesn't feel right, and maybe the best bet is to walk away from that investor and find another one. And that's really hard to do when you're trying to build your baby, right? You've got this company, you've poured your heart and soul and sweat and blood and tears into it, and you have this money available. But I would very much encourage you to really look at this like a relationship and look at the investor like a partner.
Wow. Hey, Eddie, question for you, and David, both of you guys. Describe the investor, or describe the concept, or let's talk about the concept of social equity businesses saying that investors are not looking for them. And I think, can you describe the appetite of investors? Do they look at like who's bringing it, the deal or what have you? Or are they looking at just, I want to see a strong financially built deal that really makes sense? And I think it's so important to have this type of conversation.
It's the latter. I come from a Black physician family where my father-in-law spent 24 years on the state medical board, has a DEA license, practices medicine, and was very nervous about putting his dollars into just a fly-by-day concept around cannabis. I mean, it took us a long road. I remember the November of the year prior to him ever. I mean, you should hear him now. He's brags about his big grow business. He owns the #1 cultivation facility in the state of Arkansas. But his appetite, being a business savant and a very savvy investor, it was tough, because he was looking for real tangible deals that could give you a pro forma that showed you in 5 years how much of a return he could make on his initial investment. And for us, we recognize that in going into these consultation efforts to help new companies with their licenses, to David's point, it was so important that not only did we work to try and assist them as a partner in identifying capital, but really partnering up with them through the equity approach so that they knew we had just as much to lose in this as they did on any deal that we work on across the board. And I found that to be very beneficial. That means we're all staying up late and waking up early to get the applications in. We're all on board. We're providing all of our time and energy. It's like you said, we built this baby, and now once we get the license, you're still looking at 20 months, maybe post license, to get your facility up off the ground and operating. And then another year before you're seeing your first streamline of revenue. And people don't think about that. And especially in our communities where money is still very scarce, You know, you don't have any more black banks like a Seaway Bank in Chicago.
Yeah. United, but I'm not United, but what is it? United?
Liberty.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that one too. So anyway, those opportunities don't exist. So it's a real unique walk.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there.
I know. I'm sorry, David.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's a really interesting question, right? Because there are definitely issues of implicit bias, right? Like, as I mentioned, an investment relationship is like a partnership, and just because of the sort of uneven playing field that we've had in this country for hundreds of years, it turns out that the people with the most money tend to be white, and a lot of them don't really feel comfortable or might have some implicit bias around people of color, and so it can make it harder for them to feel comfortable entering into those relationships. On the other side, because of the inequity and because of the history of the United States, there are a lot of people of color who don't have access to the same educational resources that their white peers had access to, and that's one of the reasons we're launching this program with Amsterdam University to educate folks around funding, so that when they walk into a room with an investor and start to have these conversations, they don't feel lost, right? They understand what's being discussed. They understand what the implications are there. So that's definitely another hurdle. And then looking at the social equity policies that have been passed around the country for cannabis, depending on how the social equity policy is crafted, it could help or hurt investment chances for the applicants. So some social equity policies are crafted in such a way that it just makes it very difficult for non-minorities to invest in the social equity license because there are very strict requirements about percentages and ownerships that makes it difficult for companies to raise the capital they need. If there are restrictions on selling, right? One of the big things that a lot of investors look for is the possibility of an exit. So, you know, can this company be sold? And if there are restrictions on who can buy it, then that might scare away some investors. Conversely, there are some social equity policies that give preferential treatment to equity licenses, or give other benefits to equity licenses that might make them more attractive to investors. So that's one of the reasons it's so important to craft good policies, and it's a hard problem at MCBA. We spend a lot of time looking at social equity policy drafting, policies that we can distribute to states, and it's hard. It's a hard balance to get right, to make sure that we're creating opportunities and not cutting off opportunities. And we've certainly learned a lot looking at social equity policies that have succeeded or failed, and why. But
just saw that in Illinois.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's a much.
Hey, Eddie, I know we're coming up. I can't believe we're almost out of time already, man. I feel like there's so much to talk about. We might have to do a part 2 to this conversation. But Eddie, I'm really, really interested in the crowdfunding platform that you guys are building out. You mentioned something that I have to elaborate on. You mentioned that one of the things that makes you all different is that you guys are a broker-dealer led crowdfunding. Can you explain that? What it means? Because traditional crowdfunding, you just kind of put it on there yourself, and you got to market it yourself a little bit to bring people towards you. But it's talk about that.
Yeah, and I just want to dial back on David's point about exiting. A lot of times people don't realize the investment world of traditional or really savvy investors, and what they're looking for is a stop date for their money. How long can I get in here? When does it meet its highest return, and when can I get out of it? And if you're my auntie and uncle sitting on 50 grand in retirement and they want to get in this, yet they don't understand the investment world, then this will be all cloudy for them.
Sure.
And so in the equity crowdfunding space after meeting Jeff and David. And David, I'd like for you to expound briefly on the broker-dealer background and why that is so important. We saw it as a need with our medical advisory group that any company or product or service, through our crowdfunding platform that we vet and will announce and launch on our platform, that they were properly vetted and that they were held up with guardrails with something like a broker-dealer. David, would you just chime in a brief bit on what a broker-dealer actually covers as it relates to really insulating the equity crowdfunding space for us?
Yeah. So broker-dealer is a sort of complex regulatory designation that allows a company to do certain kinds of activities that are not permitted for people without that license. And the idea is that some of these activities should be regulated, and the broker-dealer licenses allow the government to have some oversight over how companies help raise money to try to make sure that there isn't sort of predatory activity going on, things like pump and dumps and all sorts of potentially problematic behavior. We're fortunate that Jeff Pasquarella with Arcview Capital spent 17 years as a regulator for FINRA. He ran the financial crimes unit at UBS for I think North and South America for a long time. So he's very, very acquainted with what you can and can't do and what you should and shouldn't do in the space, and really dedicated to making sure that we build a platform that helps people and avoid some of the pitfalls that you can run into. And just to talk about the importance of equity crowdfunding and what that even means, the United States has a designation called accredited investor. Yes. And basically, if you want to invest in an early stage company, you have to be an accredited investor. There are a few exemptions. So if you're friends and family, if you have a pre-existing relationship with someone, you can invest in their company, in their early stage company.
How much money it takes to be an accredited investor?
So accredited investor sounds like a fancy thing that you actually like fill out a form or get a license for. No, it just means that you're rich, essentially.
But
you need to have $1 million or more in net worth, not counting your primary residence, or you need to make, I think it's over $200,000 a year.
I think it's 250.
250, yeah. So essentially it's just the wealth threshold, and what that does functionally is it locks most people out of making a potentially very lucrative kind of investment. And the Jobs Act that Obama passed included in Title III something that allowed for equity crowdfunding. It allowed people who were not accredited investors to invest small amounts into early stage companies. And that's what this is built around, is really letting regular people who are not already wealthy have access to the type of opportunities to generate wealth that normally have been reserved for wealthy people. Now, it's really important if you're thinking about investing in on these equity crowdfunding platforms that you do your research and that you become a sophisticated investor, so that you understand how to make sure that you're not being taken advantage of, how to make sure that you're diversified, because some of these investments will fail. And so it's important to make sure that you're spreading the money around in such a way that that you have the best chances possible of succeeding.
That's why this marriage was so important for Arcview Capital and CCG. With my regulatory background as a former lobbyist and big corporate and a state lawmaker, I recognized that we didn't want to ask for a single penny or even advertise anything unless it was properly vetted, it met the thresholds, and when we went to market, that anybody that invested knew that they were protected by our broker-dealer license to make certain that their deals actually stood up. Now, is the investment still a risk? Yes, but you at least have some parameters in which you feel a safe haven and bringing sure your investments are covered.
Absolutely. Hey guys, I know we have to wrap up because David has a meeting he has to go to. I got a quick question. What will be the minimum threshold to enter into the crowdfunding in regards to amount of money to participate? Is it 10,000? Is it 5,000? Is it?
And I have to step away. I'm getting ready to charge up my lap.
So I'll have to double check on what the minimum is, but it's low. You can invest pretty small amounts, and I believe, and again, don't quote me on this. This isn't my particular area of expertise, but I believe that the maximum is something like $5,000 or $10,000 that you can invest into any one company through this equity crowdfunding platform. But yeah, the whole idea is really making investing accessible to a whole new group of people. And I do have to hop off for another. So
you got to make me a promise. You guys got to come back.
You promise?
Absolutely.
I got like 10 other questions over here.
Man, you got to come back and so David, if you need a scoop, I want, as I wrap up, the reason why I want to make sure you guys come back is because I think it's imperative for us to be able to offer access. So be able to, once you have an opportunity to get the crowdfunding going, here's the information, go and tell our followers and people that are watching, here's where you go to. We're going to do that little sheet that gives them all of the different services that Arcview offers. Your market research by itself is fire. And so we need to talk about that as well. So, man, I'm just so appreciative, David. And I even announced that Arcview has blessed M for MM for the month of April, guys. Arcview has put M for MM on a nice little pedestal and says, look at the work that they're doing, telling their community, their investors to donate to our organization. It wasn't my idea. I didn't come up with it. I didn't even ask for it. It was just, hey, Roz, we want to do this. And I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you, David, and all the team over at Arcview. So let's keep this conversation going, please. I'll arrange it to have you two back. Eddie, is that going to be good for you?
Absolutely. We got to do part two. There's too much.
We got to do part two. It's too much.
Yeah.
It's too much.
Yeah.
David, if that's good for you. And E, take us home, brother.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. I'm gonna hop off. I'll see you again soon.
All right, David. Thank you.
I already know my DMs are filled up right now. Like, how can I get my business in front of Mr. Eddie Armstrong? So thank you to everybody who tuned in today. Thank you guys for chiming in on the comments. To our two guests, thank you guys for just coming and sharing so much great information about a topic that really, really and truly is at the crux of whether or not this industry can be diverse. And it all starts with the capital. So thank you guys for taking the time. As always, go this weekend, love on yourself, love on your family, get some rest, because come Monday morning, we got work to do. And we will see you guys back here next week on another episode of Cannabis. Thank you for joining us.
All right, guys. Have a great weekend. Hey, Deborah Johnson. Hey, all of our top fans out there. Good to see you. We'll see you next week. Hey, next week we're getting ready. We got a lot of stuff going on. But have a great weekend, everybody. Eddie Armstrong. See you later, brother. Appreciate you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.